The wipers on Michael Thompson's 15-year-old Ford pickup fought a losing battle against the Tennessee mountain rain. Each swipe across the cracked windshield only smeared the water into streaks that caught the headlights of oncoming traffic like broken glass. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his calloused hands aching from another 12-hour day repairing Mrs. Henderson's sagging front porch. The digital clock on his dashboard glowed an angry red 8:47 p.m. "Damn it," he muttered, pressing harder on the accelerator. Tommy needed his heart medication by 9 o'clock sharp, and Michael was still 20 minutes from their small house on the outskirts of Millbrook. His 4-year-old son's irregular heartbeat had been acting up lately, and Dr. Martinez had been very clear about the timing of the medication. The mountain road twisted through dense pine forests, each curve more treacherous than the last in this weather. Michael had driven this road 1,000 times since Sarah's death 18 months ago, but tonight felt different. The storm had come out of nowhere, turning the familiar passage into something ominous and unpredictable. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat, a text from Mrs. Patterson, his elderly neighbor who watched Tommy during his late jobs. "Little man asking for daddy, keeps checking the door." Michael's chest tightened. Since Sarah died, Tommy had developed a fear of being left alone, even with trusted babysitters. The boy would sit by the front window until Michael's headlights appeared in the driveway, only then allowing himself to relax. The truck rounded another sharp curve, and Michael's breath caught in his throat. There, maybe 100 yards ahead, red taillights glowed through the rain like demonic eyes. But they weren't moving. They were tilted at an impossible angle, pointing up toward the canopy of trees that lined the narrow road. Michael slammed on the brakes, his truck skidding slightly on the wet asphalt before coming to a stop 30 feet from the wreckage. Through the downpour, he could make out the twisted metal of what had once been a luxury car, a BMW. By the looks of it, silver and sleek even in its mangled state. Steam rose from the crumpled hood, and somewhere in the darkness, an iPhone alarm was going off with that distinctive electronic chime. For a moment, Michael sat frozen behind the wheel. Engine idling. Tommy needed his medication. Mrs. Patterson was waiting. Every minute counted when it came to his son's heart condition, but someone might be dying in that car. "Son of a bitch," he whispered, throwing the truck into park and grabbing the emergency flashlight from his glove compartment. The rain hit him like a cold slap as he stepped out into the storm. His work boots splashed through puddles as he jogged toward the wreckage, the beam of his flashlight dancing across the scene. The BMW had hit one of the massive oak trees that stood sentinel along this stretch of road, the impact so violent that the car's front end had crumpled like an accordion. The driver's side was completely smashed in, pressed against the tree trunk. Michael circled around to the passenger side, his heart hammering in his chest. The door hung open at an odd angle, and he could see movement inside. Someone was alive. "Hello," he called out over the roar of the rain and the hissing steam from the engine. "Can you hear me?" He reached the passenger door and swept his flashlight beam inside. What he saw made him pause. A woman, maybe in her early 30s, was slumped across the center console. Her blonde hair was matted with blood from a cut on her temple, but her chest was rising and falling steadily. She wore an expensive-looking black dress that had probably cost more than Michael made in a month. And on the floor beneath her feet was a designer handbag, Hermes. If he remembered correctly from the magazines Sarah used to flip through at the doctor's office. But it wasn't her obvious wealth that made Michael's hands tremble as he reached for her. It was her face, even unconscious, even injured. She looked exactly like Sarah. Not similar, not reminiscent. Exactly like her. Michael's knees nearly buckled. He gripped the doorframe to steady himself, blinking hard to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. The rain drummed against his back as he stared at the woman's face, taking in every detail. The delicate curve of her jawline, the small scar above her left eyebrow, the same scar Sarah had gotten falling off her bike when she was 7. Even the tiny mole just below her right ear. It was impossible. Sarah had been cremated. He'd scattered her ashes himself in the meadow behind their house where she used to pick wildflowers with Tommy. "Ma'am," his voice came out cracked and unsteady. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" The woman stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering. Michael forced himself to move, to push past the shock and focus on getting her out of the car. The engine was still hissing, and he could smell something that might have been gasoline. He reached under her arms and carefully pulled her from the wreckage. She was lighter than Sarah had been. He noticed more delicate somehow. As he lifted her, papers scattered from her purse across the wet asphalt, business cards, what looked like legal documents, and a boarding pass from Los Angeles to Nashville. Michael managed to get her to his truck and into the passenger seat, wrapping her in the emergency blanket he kept behind the seat. As he was reaching for his phone to call 911, her eyes opened. They were blue, the exact same shade of cornflower blue as Sarah's. Sarah. The word escaped his lips before he could stop it. The woman blinked slowly, confusion clouding her features. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse but distinctly different from Sarah's. There was something sophisticated about it, an accent that spoke of expensive schools in big cities. I'm sorry, what? She tried to sit up straighter, wincing as she did. My head. No, don't move too much, Michael said quickly, his hands shaking as he dialed 911. You've been in an accident. I'm calling for an ambulance. Wait. She reached out and touched his arm, and Michael felt an electric shock run through him. What did you call me? Michael stared at her, his throat dry. Nothing. I thought you were someone else. As he waited for the 911 operator to answer, he found himself studying her face again. The similarities to Sarah were uncanny, but now that she was conscious, he could see the differences too. Her nose was slightly different, more refined. Her lips were fuller, and there was something in her eyes, a sharpness that Sarah had never possessed. 911, what's your emergency? Car accident on Highway 127, about 10 miles east of Millbrook, Michael said, never taking his eyes off the woman. One victim, conscious but injured. We need an ambulance. Sir, are you injured as well? No, I'm the one who found her. She was unconscious when I pulled her from the car. As he provided the dispatcher with more details, the woman was looking around the cab of his truck with growing awareness. Her gaze fell on the insurance papers clipped to his visor, and he saw her eyes widen slightly when she read his name. Michael Thompson, she whispered. He nearly dropped the phone. How do you know my name? But before she could answer, the sound of sirens began to echo through the mountains, growing louder with each passing second. The emergency room at Millbrook General Hospital was a harsh, fluorescent nightmare of white walls and antiseptic smells. Michael sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, still in his wet work clothes, watching through the glass doors as doctors examined the woman from the car. It was past 11 o'clock. Tommy's medication was hours late, and Mrs. Patterson had called twice asking when he'd be home. But something kept Michael rooted to that chair, unable to leave until he knew the woman was going to be okay. Dr. Sarah Kim, a young resident with kind eyes, emerged from the examination room and walked over to where Michael sat. She's going to be fine, Dr. Kim said, settling into the chair beside him. Mild concussion, some cuts and bruises, but nothing serious. You got to her just in time if that car had caught fire. Michael nodded, relief flooding through him. Has she said anything about what happened? That's the interesting part. Dr. Kim glanced back toward the examination room. She's experiencing some temporary memory loss, not uncommon with head injuries. But she can't remember much of anything before the accident. She knows her first name, Isabella, but that's about it. Isabella, Michael repeated. The name felt foreign on his tongue, nothing like the Sarah that had nearly slipped out earlier. We found her driver's license in her purse, Dr. Kim continued. Isabella Rosewood, address in Palo Alto, California. We're trying to contact her emergency contacts, but so far no luck. What was she doing in Tennessee? She doesn't remember, but there were some interesting things in her car before the tow truck took it away. Dr. Kim pulled out a plastic evidence bag containing several water-damaged papers. Business cards for a tech company called Rosewood Technologies, some legal documents that look like they might be related to adoption records, and this. Avery, she handed Michael a photograph that had been partially protected by a leather portfolio. It showed a young girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, standing next to another girl who looked exactly like her. Twins. Michael's hands trembled as he stared at the photo. One of the girls looked exactly like Sarah had. At that age, he'd seen enough childhood pictures to recognize her immediately. Mr. Thompson. Dr. Kim was studying his face with concern. Are you all right? This girl. Michael pointed to one of the twins. She looks like someone I used to know. Really, that's quite a coincidence. Dr. Kim stood up. Would you like to see her? She's been asking about the man who saved her. Michael followed Dr. Kim down the sterile corridor, his mind racing. The photograph, the uncanny resemblance, the fact that Isabella had somehow known his name, none of it made sense. Isabella was sitting up in the hospital bed when they entered, looking small and vulnerable in the standard issue gown. Someone had cleaned the blood from her hair, and in the harsh hospital lighting, the resemblance to Sarah was even more striking. This is Michael Thompson, Dr. Kim said. He's the one who pulled you from the car. Isabella's blue eyes met his, and Michael felt that same electric shock he'd experienced in the truck. Thank you, she said softly. They tell me you probably saved my life. Just glad you're okay. Michael remained near the door, unsure of himself. How are you feeling? Like I've been hit by a truck, but grateful. She gestured to the chair beside her bed. Please sit. I feel like I owe you more than just thanks. Michael reluctantly took the seat, hyper-aware of how close she was. You don't owe me anything. Anyone would have done the same thing. I'm not so sure about that. Isabella studied his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. This might sound strange, but do I know you when I first saw you? I felt like I recognized you somehow. You said my name, Michael said carefully. In the truck. How did you know my name? Isabella frowned, pressing her fingertips to her temples. I don't remember saying that. Everything from the accident is pretty fuzzy. Dr. Kim cleared her throat. Miss Rosewood, we were wondering about your travel plans. You had a rental car agreement in your purse. You picked up the BMW at Nashville Airport yesterday. Do you remember why you came to Tennessee? Isabella closed her eyes, concentrating. I think I was looking for someone, a person from my past, but I can't remember who. Michael felt his pulse quicken. Dr. Kim showed me a photo from your car. 2 little girls who looked like twins. Isabella's eyes snapped open. Yes, I remember that photo. One of them is me, but I don't know who the other girl is. I think she might be why I came here. The room fell silent except for the steady beep of the heart monitor. Michael stared at Isabella, pieces of an impossible puzzle starting to form in his mind. What's your full name? He asked quietly. Isabella Rosewood, but... She hesitated. That's my adopted name. I was adopted when I was very young, maybe 5 or 6 years old. My birth name was different, but I can't remember it. Michael's mouth went dry. Where were you adopted from? I think it was somewhere in the South. Tennessee, maybe, or Kentucky. Isabella rubbed her forehead. It's all so foggy. My parents, my adopted parents, they never talked much about it. They said it was better to focus on the future instead of the past. Ms. Rosewood, Dr. Kim interjected, do you have somewhere to stay while you recover? We'd like to keep you for observation tonight, but you'll be discharged tomorrow. Isabella looked lost. I'm not sure. I suppose I could find a hotel. The nearest decent hotel is 40 miles away. Michael heard himself saying, and with your concussion, you shouldn't be driving. I could call a cab, or maybe rent another car. I have a guest room, Michael said, the words coming out before he could stop them. Just until you get your bearings back. It's the least I can do. Dr. Kim looked surprised. Mr. Thompson, that's very generous. But it's fine, Isabella said quickly, and Michael could see relief in her eyes. If you're sure it's not too much trouble. No trouble at all. Michael stood up, suddenly needing to get out of the small room. I'll come back tomorrow morning to pick you up. As he walked toward the door, Isabella called after him. Michael. He turned back. Thank you for everything. Michael nodded and left the room, his head spinning. In the hallway. He pulled out his phone and called Mrs. Patterson. Michael thanked God. Tommy's been worried sick. Where are you? I'm at the hospital. There was an accident. Are you hurt? No? No, I'm fine. I helped someone who was injured. Listen, Mrs. Patterson, I need you to give Tommy his medication. The bottle is in the kitchen cabinet. 2 pills, and I'll be home in about an hour. Of course, dear. Is everything all right? You sound strange. Michael leaned against the hospital wall, staring at the fluorescent lights above. I honestly don't know. The drive home from the hospital took Michael through the heart of Millbrook, past the shuttered storefronts and the single traffic light that blinked yellow after 9 p.m. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still slick and empty except for the occasional pickup truck or sedan making its way through the quiet night. Michael's house sat on 2 acres at the end of Maple Street, a modest 2-bedroom built in the 1940s that he and Sarah had bought right after they got married. The white paint was peeling in places, and the front porch sagged slightly on one side, projects he'd been meaning to get to ever since Sarah got sick, but somehow never found the time or energy to complete. Mrs. Patterson's porch light was on next door, and Michael could see her silhouette in the kitchen window as she washed dishes. He pulled into his gravel driveway and sat for a moment in the truck, trying to process everything that had happened. Isabella Rosewood. The name itself suggested wealth and sophistication worlds away from his own blue-collar existence. But those eyes, that face, it was like Sarah had come back to him in the form of a stranger. The front door opened before he reached it, and Mrs. Patterson stepped out onto her porch wearing a faded housecoat and slippers. Michael, honey, how is she? The woman from the accident. She's going to be fine, Michael said, fishing his keys from his pocket. Concussion, but nothing serious. That's a blessing. Tommy finally fell asleep about an hour ago, but he was asking for you right up until the end. Mrs. Patterson studied his face in the porch light. You look like you've seen a ghost. Michael paused with his key halfway to the lock. Maybe I have. What do you mean? He turned to face her. This woman who had been Sarah's substitute mother when her own parents died young, who had helped plan their wedding and held Tommy the day he was born. If anyone would understand, it would be Betty Patterson. The woman I pulled from the car, he said slowly. She looks exactly like Sarah. Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose. Well, I suppose some people do share similar features. No, Betty, not similar. Exactly like her. Like they could be sisters. Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. What are you thinking? Michael, I don't know what to think. She's adopted, says she came to Tennessee looking for someone from her past, and there was a photo in her car of 2 little girls who looked like twins. Oh my, Mrs. Patterson whispered. I invited her to stay here while she recovers. I know it sounds crazy, but it doesn't sound crazy at all, Mrs. Patterson said firmly. If there's even a chance she's family, Sarah would want you to help her. Michael nodded, grateful for her understanding. I better check on Tommy. He took his medicine like a good boy. But Michael, she waited until he looked at her. Be careful. I know how much you miss Sarah, but don't let hope cloud your judgment. Inside the house, Michael moved quietly through the familiar rooms. Everything was exactly as he'd left it that morning, Tommy's toys scattered across the living room floor. Breakfast dishes still in the sink. Sarah's coffee mug on the counter where it had sat unwashed for 18 months because Michael couldn't bring himself to put it away. Tommy's bedroom door was cracked open, and Michael could see his son sleeping peacefully under his favorite dinosaur blanket. The boy's dark hair was tousled across his forehead, and his breathing was steady and strong. The heart medication was working. Michael stood in the doorway for several minutes, watching his son sleep and thinking about the woman in the hospital. What were the chances that someone who looked so much like Sarah would crash her car on the very road he traveled every night? What were the chances that she would be adopted from somewhere in the South, possibly Tennessee, and have a photograph of twin girls in her possession? He thought about the business cards Dr. Kim had mentioned, Rosewood Technologies, even with his limited knowledge of the tech world. Michael knew that Silicon Valley companies weren't small operations. If Isabella was associated with a tech company in Palo Alto, she was likely very wealthy. But what was she doing in rural Tennessee? And why did she have adoption records with her? Michael closed Tommy's door softly and made his way to his own bedroom. On the nightstand beside his bed was a framed photo of Sarah holding newborn Tommy in the hospital. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she was smiling despite the exhaustion in her eyes. He picked up the photo and studied Sarah's face, then tried to recall every detail of Isabella's features. The bone structure was identical, the eye color, the shape of her nose, even the way her lips curved when she spoke. The only real differences were subtle. Isabella's hair was longer and styled differently. Her complexion was slightly more tanned, and there was something more sophisticated about her overall appearance. Michael set the photo down and pulled out his laptop. An ancient Dell that took several minutes to boot up. When it finally connected to his wireless internet, he typed Rosewood Technologies into the search bar. The results made his breath catch in his throat. Rosewood Technologies was a major player in the artificial intelligence and machine learning space, founded 5 years earlier and now worth an estimated $2.8 billion. The company's website featured a sleek design and testimonials from Fortune 500 companies who used their software for everything from customer service to financial analysis. But it was the About Us page that made Michael's hands shake as he scrolled down to the leadership team. There, under Chief Executive Officer, was a professional headshot of Isabella Rosewood. She was wearing a navy business suit and smiling confidently at the camera, her blonde hair styled in a sophisticated bob. The accompanying bio read, Isabella Rosewood founded Rosewood Technologies in 2019 with the vision of making artificial intelligence accessible to businesses of all sizes. Under her leadership, the company has grown from a startup in her garage to a major industry player with over 500 employees worldwide. Ms. Rosewood holds an MBA from Stanford University and a bachelor's degree in computer science from MIT. She has been featured on the covers of Forbes, Fortune, and Entrepreneur magazines, and was named to the 40 Under 40 list by both Forbes and Inc. magazine. Michael stared at the screen. The woman he'd pulled from a wrecked BMW wasn't just wealthy, she was a multi-millionaire tech CEO. What was someone like that doing driving alone through rural Tennessee mountains at night? He clicked on the news section of the website and found several recent articles about the company. The most recent, dated just 3 weeks ago, was from TechCrunch. Rosewood Technologies announces major expansion plans as CEO takes sabbatical. Michael read the article twice, according to the report. Isabella had announced that she was taking a 3-month sabbatical from the company to pursue personal projects and had turned day-to-day operations over to her co-founder and CTO. The article speculated about potential acquisitions or new product launches, but Isabella had refused to provide specifics about her plans. A 3-month sabbatical to pursue personal projects. And she'd ended up in Tennessee with adoption records and a photo of twin girls. Michael closed the laptop and lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, he would bring Isabella Rosewood, millionaire tech CEO, to his modest house with the peeling paint and sagging porch. She would sleep in the guest room that doubled as his home office, surrounded by the carefully preserved remnants of his life with Sarah. And maybe, just maybe, he would finally get some answers about the impossible resemblance that had shaken him to his core. But first, he needed to call in sick to work and figure out how to explain to Tommy why a woman who looked exactly like his mother would be staying in their house. Michael woke to the sound of small feet pattering across the hardwood floor and the familiar creak of his bedroom door opening. Pale morning light filtered through the curtains as Tommy climbed onto the bed. Still wearing his dinosaur pajamas and clutching his stuffed elephant. "Daddy, you're home." Tommy settled against Michael's side with the easy affection of a 4-year-old who had never known a world where his father wasn't the center of his universe. "Good morning, buddy." Michael ruffled Tommy's dark hair, which stuck up at odd angles despite Mrs. Patterson's best efforts the night before. "How are you feeling today?" "Good, my chest doesn't hurt." Tommy pressed his small hand against his heart, a gesture that always made Michael's throat tighten. "Mrs. Patterson made me pancakes." but I saved you some." "That was nice of her." Michael glanced at the clock, 8:30 a.m. He'd slept later than usual, exhaustion from the previous night finally catching up with him. "Listen, buddy, I need to tell you something important." Tommy looked up at him with wide brown eyes, Sarah's eyes. Michael realized with a pang, in some ways, Tommy looked more like his mother than his father, especially around the eyes and the shape of his face. "Remember how Mommy had to go away because she got sick?" Michael said carefully. Tommy nodded solemnly. They'd had this conversation many times over the past 18 months, and Tommy seemed to understand as much as any 4-year-old could that his mother wasn't coming back. "Well, last night I helped a lady who was hurt in a car accident. She's going to stay with us for a few days while she gets better. Like when Grandma Betty stays over." "Sort of like that." Michael hesitated, unsure how to prepare Tommy for what he was about to see. "This lady looks a lot like Mommy did. Not exactly the same, but very similar. I want you to understand that she's not Mommy. Okay, her name is Isabella, and she's a different person." Tommy frowned, processing this information with the seriousness he brought to most adult conversations. "Why does she look like Mommy?" "I don't know. Buddy, sometimes people just look alike, even when they're not related." "Can I meet her?" "You will, when I bring her home from the hospital. But remember, she's not Mommy. She's just a friend who needs our help." Tommy nodded again, then settled more comfortably against Michael's side. "Daddy, do you think Mommy would want us to help her?" The question hit Michael like a physical blow. Sarah had always been the one to take in stray cats, to volunteer at the church food bank, to invite lonely neighbors over for Sunday dinner. She would absolutely want them to help Isabella. "Yes," Michael said quietly. "I think Mommy would definitely want us to help her." After Tommy went to play in the living room, Michael called his supervisor at Henderson Construction. "Mike, you never call in sick," Ron Henderson said when Michael explained he needed the day off. "You sure you're not just hungover?" "I'm sure. I'll make up the hours tomorrow." "Take care of yourself, man. And Mike, that woman you helped last night, the whole town's talking about it. Mrs. Garcia saw the ambulance in the tow truck on her way home from her night shift at the diner." Michael grimaced. Millbrook was the kind of small town where news traveled faster than wildfire, especially when it involved car accidents and strangers. By noon, everyone would know that Michael Thompson had rescued a woman from a BMW and taken her to the hospital. "It was nothing," Michael said. "Just helped someone who needed it." "Still, good for you. Sarah would be proud." After hanging up, Michael made coffee and breakfast while Tommy played with his toy dinosaurs on the living room carpet. The morning routine was familiar and comforting: coffee in Sarah's favorite mug, which Michael had finally started using again. Scrambled eggs the way Tommy liked them. Toast cut into triangles. At 10 o'clock, Michael called the hospital to check on Isabella's discharge status. Dr. Kim told him she was ready to go and that the patient seemed anxious to leave. "She's been asking about you," Dr. Kim added. "I think she's genuinely grateful for what you did." Michael arranged for Mrs. Patterson to watch Tommy for a few hours, then drove back to Millbrook General. The October morning was crisp and clear, with the kind of brilliant blue sky that made the Tennessee mountains look like a postcard. The storm from the night before had washed the air clean, and everything seemed to sparkle in the sunlight. Isabella was waiting in the hospital lobby when he arrived, wearing the same black dress from the night before, but looking considerably better than she had in the emergency room. Someone had helped her wash and style her hair, and the cut on her temple was covered with a small bandage. In the natural light, she looked even more like Sarah, so much so that Michael had to pause in the doorway to collect himself. She smiled when she saw him, and Michael felt that familiar electric shock. "Michael, thank you for coming. I wasn't sure if you'd really show up." "Of course I did." He approached cautiously, still unnerved by her resemblance to his late wife. "How are you feeling?" "Much better. Still a little dizzy, but the headache is almost gone." She stood up from the lobby chair, moving carefully. "The doctor said I should take it easy for a few days and avoid driving until the concussion symptoms completely clear up." "That's probably wise." Michael gestured toward the exit. My truck is outside. It's not as nice as your BMW, but it'll get us there. Isabella laughed, and the sound sent chills down Michael's spine. It wasn't exactly like Sarah's laugh, but it was close enough to resurrect memories he'd been trying to bury. As they walked to the parking lot, Isabella asked, "Tell me about Millbrook. I don't remember much about why I came here, but it seems like a nice town." "It's small. Population about 8,000. Most people work at the furniture factory or commute to Nashville for jobs. Not much exciting happens here." "Sometimes small towns are exactly what you need," Isabella said thoughtfully. Michael helped her into the passenger seat of his truck. Hyper-aware of how close she was as he reached across to adjust her seatbelt, she smelled like hospital soap and something else, an expensive perfume that was nothing like the simple lavender scent Sarah had always worn. "I hope you don't mind," Isabella said as Michael started the engine, "but I asked the hospital to contact my insurance company about covering your expenses. For the truck, your time, anything related to helping me last night?" "That's not necessary. It's the least I can do." Isabella turned in her seat to look at him. "I also wanted to ask about the photo the doctor showed me, the one with the two little girls. Do you really think one of them looked like someone you knew?" Michael was quiet for a moment, navigating the truck out of the hospital parking lot and onto the main road toward home. "My wife," he said finally. "She passed away 18 months ago. One of the girls in that photo looked exactly like she did as a child." "I'm so sorry for your loss." Isabella's voice was soft. "What was her name?" "Sarah. Sarah Thompson." Isabella was quiet for several moments, staring out the passenger window at the passing scenery. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Sarah. That name. It feels familiar somehow." Michael's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Familiar how?" "I don't know. Like an echo of something I should remember but can't quite reach." Isabella pressed her fingertips to her temples. "Ever since the accident, I keep having these flashes of memory. A yellow house, a playground, and a name that sounds like Sarah, but not quite. What kind of name? Maybe Lily or Sally." Isabella shook her head in frustration. "It's all so fuzzy. The doctors said the memories might come back gradually as my brain heals." They drove the rest of the way to Michael's house in comfortable silence, Isabella taking in the rural landscape of rolling hills and farmland that surrounded Millbrook. When Michael pulled into his gravel driveway, she studied the modest white house with its wraparound porch and flower beds that had gone wild since Sarah's death. "It's lovely," she said, "very homey." "It needs work," Michael admitted, noticing the house through her eyes, the peeling paint, the loose shutter, the porch steps that sagged slightly. "I keep meaning to fix things up, but there never seems to be enough time. Sometimes the imperfections are what make a place feel like home," Isabella said. Michael was about to respond when the front door flew open and Tommy bounded out onto the porch, Mrs. Patterson following close behind. The 4-year-old stopped short when he saw Isabella getting out of the truck, his eyes wide with confusion and something that might have been recognition. "Mommy," Tommy whispered. Isabella froze, one foot still in the truck, staring at the little boy with an expression Michael couldn't read. For a moment, nobody moved or spoke. Then Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Tommy, remember what Daddy told you? This is Isabella, the lady who needs our help. She's not Mommy." Tommy nodded slowly, but his eyes never left Isabella's face. "But she looks like Mommy." "I know, sweetheart," Michael said, moving to Tommy's side and putting a protective hand on his son's shoulder. "Sometimes people look very similar, even when they're different people." Isabella finally stepped fully out of the truck, moving slowly as if she were afraid she might spook the child. "Hello, Tommy," she said softly. "Your daddy saved my life last night. He's a very brave man." Tommy studied her for another moment, then seemed to reach some internal decision. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "A little bit. I bumped my head, but it's getting better. Daddy can fix things," Tommy said matter-of-factly. "He fixed my bike when it was broken." Isabella smiled, and Michael saw Tommy's expression brighten in response. I bet he's very good at fixing things. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, extending her hand to Isabella. I'm Betty Patterson, Michael's neighbor and unofficial family manager. Welcome to Millbrook. Isabella Rosewood. Thank you for taking care of Tommy last night. Think nothing of it. That boy is like my own grandson. Mrs. Patterson studied Isabella's face with the frankness of someone who had lived long enough to say exactly what she thought. My goodness, Michael wasn't exaggerating about the resemblance. So I'm told, Isabella said quietly. I wish I could remember more about why I came here. I feel like there's something important I'm forgetting. Well, maybe it'll come back to you while you're resting up, Mrs. Patterson said kindly. And if you need anything at all, you just holler. I'm right next door. As Mrs. Patterson headed back to her own house, Michael led Isabella and Tommy into the house. The living room was exactly as he'd left it that morning, Tommy's toys scattered around. Yesterday's newspaper still folded on the coffee table. Sarah's favorite throw blanket draped over the back of the couch. Isabella looked around the room, taking in the family photos on the mantel, the child-sized furniture mixed in with the adult pieces, the general lived-in feeling of a house where a small boy was clearly the center of attention. You have a beautiful home, she said. Can I show you my dinosaurs? Tommy asked, suddenly animated. Without waiting for an answer, he began gathering up his toy collection from around the room. This one is a T-Rex, and this one is a Triceratops, and this one is a... Michael watched as Tommy launched into an enthusiastic explanation of his dinosaur collection, complete with sound effects and dramatic reenactments of prehistoric battles. Isabella listened with apparent fascination, asking questions and making appropriate impressed noises. Watching them together, Michael felt a strange mix of emotions. There was something natural about the way Isabella interacted with Tommy, as if she had experience with children despite being a successful businesswoman. And Tommy, who was usually shy around strangers, seemed completely comfortable with her. Of course, Michael thought. She looks like his mother, to a 4-year-old. That probably overrode any stranger danger instincts. The guest room is just down the hall, Michael said when Tommy finally paused for breath. I'll show you where everything is. The guest room was small but comfortable, with a double bed, a dresser, and a desk that Michael used for paying bills and occasionally checking email. The walls were painted a soft yellow Sarah's choice, and the windows looked out over the backyard, where an old oak tree provided shade for Tommy's swing set. This is perfect, Isabella said, setting her purse on the dresser. Thank you again for letting me stay. I know this must be strange for you. It's fine, Michael said, though they both knew it was anything but fine. There are towels in the bathroom, and I'll clear out some space in the closet if you need to hang anything up. I should probably buy some clothes. I don't think this dress is appropriate for staying in your home. Isabella gestured to her expensive outfit, which was wrinkled and still showed signs of the previous night's trauma. There's a Walmart about 20 minutes away. Or if you want something nicer, Nashville's about an hour. Walmart will be perfect. I haven't been in a Walmart in years. Something in her tone suggested that this was part of a larger experience. She was seeking a taste of normal life that her wealth and success had put out of reach. I could drive you later this afternoon, Michael offered. Tommy likes going to town. That would be wonderful. Isabella sat down on the edge of the bed, suddenly looking tired. Would it be all right if I rested for a while? The hospital wasn't exactly conducive to sleep. Of course. Tommy and I will be in the living room if you need anything. Michael was almost to the door when Isabella called his name. He turned back to find her staring at him with an expression of confusion and something that might have been fear. Michael, can I ask you something? Sure. Last night, in the truck, you called me by a different name. Sarah. Your wife's name. Isabella's blue eyes searched his face. Why? Michael felt his cheeks burn. I told you. You look like her. In the shock of the moment. No, it was more than that. Isabella stood up, moving closer to him. You looked at me like you'd seen a ghost. Like you recognized me. Michael stared at her, his mouth dry, in the afternoon light filtering through the guest room windows. The resemblance to Sarah was even more pronounced. It wasn't just the physical features, it was something in her expression, the way she tilted her head when she asked a question. I don't know how to explain it, he said finally. Maybe I'm just projecting because I miss her so much. Maybe, Isabella said, but she didn't sound convinced. Or maybe there's something else, something we're both missing. Before Michael could respond, Tommy appeared in the doorway, clutching his stuffed elephant. Can Isabella read me a story? He asked. Michael looked at Isabella, who smiled and nodded. I'd love to read you a story. Tommy, what's your favorite book? As Tommy led Isabella to the living room to select a book from his collection, Michael remained in the guest room doorway, watching them go. The way Tommy's small hand fit so naturally into Isabella's. The way she automatically shortened her stride to match his, it was like watching a home movie of Sarah and Tommy. If Sarah had lived to see their son at 4 years old. Michael shook his head and went to make lunch, trying to push away the impossible thoughts that were starting to form in his mind. Isabella was a stranger, a wealthy tech executive from California who happened to look like his late wife. The adoption records and the photograph of twin girls were probably coincidence, but as he listened to Isabella's voice from the living room, reading Goodnight Moon with the same gentle inflection Sarah had always used, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that nothing about Isabella Rosewood's presence in their lives was coincidental at all. 3 days had passed since Isabella's arrival, and already the rhythms of Michael's household had begun to shift in ways both subtle and profound. She had insisted on cooking breakfast each morning, moving around his kitchen with an efficiency that suggested she was more comfortable there than her expensive clothes and tech executive background would indicate. Tommy had taken to following her around like a devoted puppy, chattering about dinosaurs and asking endless questions that she answered with infinite patience. And Michael found himself watching her constantly, looking for clues to explain the impossible resemblance that haunted his every waking moment. It was Thursday morning when the first major revelation came, though it arrived in such an ordinary way that Michael almost missed its significance entirely. Isabella was standing at the kitchen counter, scrambling eggs in the same cast-iron skillet Sarah had used every morning for 5 years. She hummed softly as she worked a melody Michael didn't recognize but found strangely soothing. Tommy sat at the small kitchen table, coloring in his dinosaur book and providing running commentary on his artistic choices. This one is going to be purple, Tommy announced, holding up his crayon. Because purple dinosaurs are the best dinosaurs. Purple is an excellent choice, Isabella agreed, flipping the eggs with practiced ease. Did you know that some scientists think dinosaurs might have actually been very colorful? Really? Tommy's eyes widened. Like rainbows. Maybe not quite like rainbows, but probably much more colorful than the movies show them. Michael watched this exchange from the doorway, coffee mug in hand, marveling at how natural Isabella seemed with his son. She had an easy way with children that suggested experience. Though her corporate biography mentioned nothing about a family of her own, the mail truck rumbled up the gravel driveway, and Michael went to collect the day's delivery. Bills, mostly electric company, credit card statements, and the ever-present medical bills from Tommy's cardiologist that made Michael's stomach clench every time he saw them. But at the bottom of the stack was something unexpected, a large manila envelope addressed to Isabella Rosewood at his address. The return address showed a law firm in Nashville, Morrison, Blake & Associates. Michael brought the mail inside, setting Isabella's envelope on the counter beside her. This came for you. Isabella glanced at the envelope, and Michael saw her face go pale. She set down the spatula with trembling hands. Are you okay? Michael asked. Yes, I think so. Isabella picked up the envelope, studying the return address. I remember this law firm. They're the ones who were helping me with... She pressed her fingertips to her temples. Something important. Something about my adoption. Do you want to open it? Isabella nodded but made no move to tear open the envelope. Her hands were shaking slightly, and Michael could see that whatever was inside had the potential to change everything. Tommy, Michael said gently, why don't you go play in your room for a few minutes? But what about breakfast? We'll call you when it's ready. Tommy looked between his father and Isabella, sensing the sudden tension in the room. then gathered up his crayons and book and headed down the hall to his bedroom. Isabella tore open the envelope with careful precision, as if she were defusing a bomb. Inside were several legal documents and a letter on law firm letterhead. She read the letter first, her eyes moving rapidly across the page, and Michael watched her expression change from confusion to shock to something approaching grief. "What is it?" Michael asked quietly. Isabella looked up at him, tears glistening in her blue eyes. "They found her," she whispered. "My sister. My twin sister." Michael felt the world tilt slightly. "Found her? Her name was—" Isabella looked back at the letter, her voice breaking. "Her name was Sarah Elizabeth Caldwell, born October 15th, 1989 in Millbrook, Tennessee. She died 18 months ago from ovarian cancer." The coffee mug slipped from Michael's hands, shattering on the kitchen floor and sending hot liquid splashing across the linoleum. He stared at Isabella, his mind struggling to process what she'd just said. "Sarah Elizabeth Caldwell," he repeated numbly. That was my wife's maiden name." Isabella's hands holding the letter began to shake violently. She was married to Michael James Thompson. They had one child together, a son named Thomas Michael Thompson, born March 3rd, 2020. "Tommy?" Michael whispered. "She died at Millbrook General Hospital on April 12th, 2023. She was—" Isabella's voice broke completely. "She was my sister, my twin sister, and I found you the night of her—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Michael sank into the kitchen chair across from her, his legs suddenly unable to support his weight. "This isn't possible. Sarah never mentioned having a sister. She was an only child. Her parents died when she was young, and she went into foster care." "According to this," Isabella said, holding up another document, "we were separated when we were 5 years old. There was some kind of family crisis. Our birth parents couldn't care for us anymore. I was adopted by the Rosewood family in California. Sarah went into the Tennessee foster system." Michael stared at the legal documents scattered across his kitchen table, his mind reeling. "So when you said my name in the truck that night, I must have recognized you somehow. Maybe from seeing you at the hospital when she—" Isabella couldn't say the word died. "Maybe some part of me knew. But you said you were looking for someone from your past. You hired lawyers to find your birth family." Isabella nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks. "I've been searching for 3 years, ever since my adopted parents died, and I found some old papers in their attic. I knew I had a sister, a twin, but the adoption agency had sealed all the records. It took Morrison, Blake and Associates 2 years to track down the paper trail." She pulled out another document, a copy of an original birth certificate. "We were born Isabella Marie Caldwell and Sarah Elizabeth Caldwell to Robert and Linda Caldwell of Millbrook, Tennessee. Our birth parents both died in a car accident when we were 5. We had no other family, so we were split up for adoption." Michael reached for the birth certificate with trembling hands. There it was in black and white, 2 baby girls born 4 minutes apart. Isabella first, then Sarah. The same last name that had become Sarah Thompson when she married him. "She never knew," Michael said quietly. "All those years we were together, all the times she talked about feeling like something was missing from her childhood. She never knew she had a sister. And I never knew I was looking for someone who was already gone," Isabella whispered. They sat in silence for several minutes, the magnitude of the revelation settling over them like a weight. The kitchen filled with the smell of eggs burning on the stove, but neither of them moved to turn off the heat. Finally, Michael stood up and switched off the burner, then returned to his seat. "The photo in your car, the one of the twin girls, it was the only thing I had from before the adoption. My adoptive parents, said the social worker gave it to them." Isabella's voice was barely audible. "I've been carrying it with me for 3 years, hoping someone would recognize the other little girl." "Someone did," Michael said. "Me, I recognized Sarah." Isabella looked up at him, her blue eyes, Sarah's eyes, filled with anguish. "Michael, I'm so sorry. I came here looking for my sister, and instead I found her family. I found you and Tommy. And now what? Now I don't know what to do." Isabella pushed back from the table, beginning to pace around the small kitchen. I fell in love with you, both of you. These past 3 days have been the happiest I've had in years. Tommy is the most amazing little boy, and you're— She stopped pacing and looked at him directly. You're everything Sarah's letters said you were. Michael's heart stopped. Letters. Isabella's face went white. I shouldn't have. The lawyers found more than just records. They found personal effects that had been stored when Sarah aged out of foster care, including letters she wrote, but never sent. Letters to who? To her sister, to me. Isabella's voice was barely a whisper. She wrote to me for years, even though she didn't know my name or where I was. She told me about falling in love with this incredible man named Michael, about getting married, about having Tommy. She told me how much she wanted her sister to meet her family. Michael felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. She wrote letters to you. Isabella nodded, tears streaming down her face. The last one was dated 2 weeks before she died. She wrote about how scared she was of leaving you and Tommy alone, how she wished her sister could be there to help take care of you both. Where are they? Michael's voice was hoarse. The letters. In my car. What's left of it? Isabella wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The lawyers sent copies of everything they found, but the originals were in my purse when I crashed. Michael stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. I need some air. He walked out the back door onto the small deck that overlooked their yard, where Tommy's swing set sat beneath the old oak tree. His hands gripped the wooden railing as he tried to process everything he'd just learned. Sarah had a twin sister. She'd written letters to that sister for years, pouring out her heart to someone she'd never met but desperately wanted to find. And now that sister was here, in his house, looking exactly like the woman he'd lost, the woman he was falling in love with all over again, behind him. He heard the back door open. Isabella stepped onto the deck, moving cautiously as if she were approaching a wounded animal. Michael, she never told me, he said without turning around. In 5 years of marriage, she never once mentioned having a sister or feeling like she had family out there somewhere. Maybe she didn't want to get your hopes up. Maybe she thought if she couldn't find me, it would just be another disappointment. Michael turned to face her, and the sight of her standing in the morning sunlight nearly brought him to his knees. She looked so much like Sarah in that moment, the way the light caught her hair, the expression of concern on her face, the way she stood with one hand pressed against her heart. I don't know how to do this, he said quietly. I don't know how to be around you knowing what I know now. What do you mean? I mean I was falling in love with you, Michael said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. These past 3 days, watching you with Tommy, having you in our house, I felt alive again for the first time since Sarah died. And now I find out you're her sister, and I don't know if what I'm feeling is real or if I'm just trying to get Sarah back through you. Isabella's face crumpled. And I don't know if I'm in love with you or if I'm just trying to be close to the sister I never got to meet. They stared at each other across the small deck, the truth of their impossible situation hanging in the air between them. There's something else, Isabella said quietly. Something I haven't told you. Michael's stomach clenched. What? The reason I could afford to take a 3-month sabbatical from my company, the reason I could hire lawyers and private investigators to search for my family. Isabella took a deep breath. I'm worth about $40 million. Michael felt the deck spin beneath his feet. $40 million. My company went public last year. I own 60% of the stock. Isabella's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather. I know that probably sounds like an impossible amount of money to you. It does, Michael said honestly. I make about $35,000 a year fixing people's porches and replacing their roof shingles. I don't care about that, but I do. Michael ran his hands through his hair. Jesus, Isabella, you're a multi-millionaire tech CEO. And I'm a small-town handyman who can barely afford his son's medication, even if we weren't dealing with everything else. We're from completely different worlds. Money doesn't matter when it comes to family, Isabella said firmly, and that's what we are now. Whether we like it or not, I'm Tommy's aunt. Sarah was my sister. That makes us family. Aunt Isabella, Tommy's voice called from inside the house. The eggs are making smoke. Michael and Isabella looked at each other. Then both began to laugh, despite everything, the hysterical laughter of people whose worlds had just been turned completely upside down. We should probably deal with the fire hazard before we figure out the rest of our lives, Isabella said, wiping tears from her eyes. Probably a good idea. They went back inside to find the kitchen filled with smoke from the abandoned eggs. Michael opened windows while Isabella scraped the burnt remnants from the pan, and Tommy stood in the doorway asking questions about why grown-ups sometimes forgot about breakfast. Sometimes adults get distracted by important conversations, Isabella explained as she started a fresh batch of eggs. Were you talking about me? Tommy asked with the self-centeredness of childhood. Isabella glanced at Michael, then knelt down to Tommy's eye level. Actually, we were. Tommy, how would you feel if I told you that I was related to Mommy like a sister? Tommy's eyes widened. You mean you're my aunt? Yes, I think I am. Tommy considered this for a moment, then threw his arms around Isabella's neck. I always wanted an aunt, he declared. Billy Peterson has an aunt, and she brings him presents. Michael watched his son embrace Isabella, his sister-in-law. He realized with a shock and felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that Tommy was taking the news well. Gratitude that Isabella had chosen to tell him the truth in such a gentle way. And underneath it all, a growing certainty that whatever happened between him and Isabella, she was now a permanent part of their lives. So does this mean you're going to stay? Tommy asked, pulling back to look at Isabella's face. Isabella's eyes met Michael's over Tommy's head. I don't know yet. Sweetheart, your daddy and I need to talk about a lot of things. But you won't leave without saying goodbye. I promise I won't leave without saying goodbye. After breakfast, Michael called in sick to work again and suggested they all drive into Nashville. Isabella needed to replace her destroyed belongings, and Michael thought the change of scenery might help them process everything that had happened. The drive to Nashville took them through rolling hills dotted with horse farms and small towns that looked like postcards. Tommy chattered excitedly from his car seat in the back, asking Isabella questions about California and tech companies and whether she had ever met any movie stars. I've met a few, Isabella admitted, but they're just regular people. Really, not as interesting as dinosaur experts like you. Tommy beamed at this assessment, and Michael found himself smiling despite the turmoil in his mind. They stopped first at a large department store where Isabella bought several outfits more appropriate for staying in a small Tennessee town: jeans, sweaters, sneakers, and a warm jacket for the October weather. Michael watched her shop with fascination, noting how she gravitated towards simple, comfortable clothes rather than the expensive designer pieces he'd expected. I haven't worn jeans in about 5 years, she admitted as they left the store. Being a CEO means a lot of business suits and networking events. Do you miss it? Michael asked. The company, the executive lifestyle. Isabella was quiet for a moment, considering the question. I miss the challenge of building something from nothing. I miss my team, they're brilliant people doing innovative work. But I don't miss the pressure, the constant travel, the feeling like I was always performing for investors and board members. They had lunch at a family restaurant Tommy chose because it had a dinosaur on the sign. As they waited for their food, Isabella pulled out her phone and showed Tommy pictures of her office in Palo Alto, a sleek space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Silicon Valley. It's very clean, Tommy observed diplomatically. Isabella laughed. It is very clean, not nearly as fun as your house. Our house has toys, Tommy said proudly. And it has you, Isabella added. Ruffling his hair, Michael watched this interaction and felt something shift inside his chest. The way Isabella looked at Tommy, the genuine affection in her voice, it wasn't just politeness or even the natural fondness of an adult for a cute child. There was something deeper there, something that spoke of real love. After lunch, they walked through a nearby park where Tommy ran ahead to climb on the playground equipment. Michael and Isabella sat on a bench, watching him play. He's amazing, Isabella said quietly. Sarah would be so proud of the little boy he's becoming. She would have loved you too, Michael said. She always felt like something was missing from her life. Now I know what it was. I wish I could have met her. I wish I could have been there when she was sick. Michael was quiet for a moment, remembering those final weeks when Sarah had grown weaker and thinner, when every day had been a struggle against the cancer that was slowly taking her away. She would have wanted to meet you too, he said finally, but she also would have wanted you to be here now, helping me take care of Tommy. Isabella turned to look at him. Is that what you want, for me to stay and help take care of him? I don't know, Michael said honestly. A week ago, my life was simple, difficult, but simple. I worked. I took care of Tommy. I tried not to think too much about how lonely I was. Now, now, now I don't know anything anymore. I don't know how I feel about you. I don't know what's best for Tommy. I don't know if we're making a terrible mistake or if this is exactly what's supposed to happen. Isabella was quiet for several minutes, watching Tommy go down the slide for the dozenth time. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. Can I tell you something about my life in California? Michael nodded. I have a beautiful house in Palo Alto, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen I never use because I'm always working. I have a Tesla in the garage and a cleaning service that comes twice a week. Isabella's voice was matter-of-fact. I also haven't had a real conversation with anyone outside of work in about 2 years. I eat most of my meals alone. I haven't been on a date in 18 months. And even then it was just networking disguised as romance. Sounds lonely. It is. I built this incredibly successful company, made more money than I ever dreamed of, and somewhere along the way, I forgot how to live. Isabella looked at him. These past 3 days with you and Tommy have been the most real I've felt in years. Even knowing that part of it might be because I remind you of Sarah. Even knowing that, Isabella's voice was steady. Michael, I can't undo the fact that I'm Sarah's sister, and you can't undo the fact that you were her husband. But maybe we don't have to. Maybe we can build something new while still honoring what came before. Before Michael could respond, Tommy came running over to the bench, his cheeks flushed from playing. Can we go see the ducks? He asked, pointing to a pond on the other side of the park. Sure, buddy. Michael stood up, grateful for the interruption. The conversation with Isabella was moving into territory he wasn't ready to navigate yet. They spent another hour at the park, feeding ducks and pushing Tommy on the swings. As the afternoon wore on, Michael found himself relaxing into the simple pleasure of watching Isabella interact with his son. She was patient and attentive, asking the right questions and showing genuine interest in Tommy's elaborate explanations of duck behavior and playground physics. It was nearly dinner time when they started the drive back to Millbrook. Tommy fell asleep in his car seat within minutes, exhausted from the day's adventures. Michael, Isabella said quietly once they were sure Tommy was fully asleep, there's something else we need to discuss. What now? Michael asked, though his tone was gentle. Tommy's medical expenses. I saw some of the bills on your kitchen counter, and I did some research on pediatric cardiology while you were taking a shower yesterday. Isabella's voice was careful, professional. His condition is serious, and the ongoing treatment costs must be enormous. Michael's hands tightened on the steering wheel. We're managing. Are you? Isabella's voice was gentle but persistent. Because from what I can tell, you're barely keeping your head above water financially, and if Tommy needs surgery, we'll figure it out, Michael said, his voice harder than he intended. We always do. You don't have to figure it out alone anymore. Michael was quiet for several miles, wrestling with his pride and his fear and his growing realization that Isabella was right. Tommy's medical bills were crushing him, and they were only going to get worse as his son got older. I can't take your money, he said finally. Why not? Because it would change everything between us? Because I'd never know if you were here, because you care about us, or because you feel guilty about having money we need? Isabella was quiet for a moment. What if I told you I'm not offering charity? What if I told you I have a proposal that would benefit both of us? Michael glanced at her suspiciously. What kind of proposal? What if I moved my company's operations to Tennessee? What if I bought some land outside Millbrook and built a tech campus there? Michael nearly swerved off the road. You want to move your entire company to Tennessee? Why not? We're fully remote anyway because of the pandemic. My employees are scattered across the country, and Tennessee has great tax incentives for tech companies. Isabella, you're talking about completely uprooting your life. I'm talking about building a new life, she said firmly. A life where I can be close to my nephew and the man who, she trailed off. The man who, what? The man who makes me want to be more than just a successful CEO. The man who makes me want to be a person again. Michael pulled into his driveway and sat for a moment with the engine idling, staring at his modest house with its peeling paint and sagging porch. In the back seat, Tommy slept peacefully, his stuffed elephant clutched in his small arms. If you moved your company here, Michael said slowly, you'd be creating jobs for people in this town. Good jobs. Hundreds of them, eventually. Software developers, project managers, customer service representatives, and we could partner with the local community college to provide training programs. Michael turned to look at her. You've really thought this through. I've been thinking about it since this morning, when I realized that everything I've been searching for my whole life is right here in this little town. Isabella's voice was quiet but certain. I found my sister's family. I found people who matter more to me than stock prices and board meetings. Why would I want to go back to California? Because this is crazy, Michael said. But there was no conviction in his voice. The best things usually are. They carried Tommy inside and got him ready for bed, working together with an ease that felt both natural and strange. Isabella read him a bedtime story while Michael cleaned up the kitchen, and when she emerged from Tommy's room 20 minutes later, she found Michael sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee and a serious expression. We need to talk about the practical stuff, he said. Isabella sat down across from him. Okay. If you're serious about moving your company here, if you're serious about staying, we need to figure out what that looks like. Michael wrapped his hands around his coffee mug. Because I care about you, Isabella, more than I probably should, considering everything. But I won't let Tommy get attached to someone who's going to leave when the novelty wears off. I'm not going anywhere, Isabella said firmly. How can you be sure? Because for the first time in my adult life, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Isabella reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Michael, I know this is complicated. I know we're both dealing with emotions and situations that don't make rational sense, but I also know that I love Tommy like he's my own child. And I love you in a way that scares me. Michael stared down at their joined hands. Even if we figure out the emotional stuff, there are practical problems. Your wealth, my lack of it. The fact that you're Sarah's sister, the fact that I'm not sure I'm ready for another relationship. Then we take it slow, Isabella said. We figure it out one day at a time. And if it doesn't work out, then at least Tommy will have his aunt in his life. At least you'll have someone who understands what Sarah meant to both of us. Michael was quiet for a long moment, considering all the ways this could go wrong and all the ways it might go right. There's one more thing, he said finally. What? If you're going to be part of our lives, if you're going to help with Tommy's medical expenses, then I want to contribute something too. And Michael looked up at her. I want to help you with your tech campus project. I know construction. I know the local contractors and suppliers. I want to be your partner in this, not just the guy you're helping out. Isabella smiled, and Michael felt his heart skip a beat. I was hoping you'd say that. Really, I know tech, but I don't know Tennessee. I don't know how to build community relationships or navigate small-town politics. I need someone who understands this place. Isabella squeezed his hand. I need you. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the weight of the day's revelations settling around them. Outside, the October wind rustled through the oak tree in the backyard, and somewhere in the distance a train whistle echoed across the hills. So what happens now? Michael asked. Now we start figuring out how to build a life together? Isabella said. All 3 of us. Michael nodded, feeling simultaneously terrified and hopeful. It's going to be complicated. The best things usually are, Isabella repeated with a smile, as they cleaned up the coffee cups and turned off the lights. Michael caught sight of himself in the hallway mirror and barely recognized the man looking back at him. For the first time in 18 months, he looked like someone who had a future to look forward to. It was going to be complicated, and it was going to be difficult, and there were 100 ways it could all fall apart. But for tonight, that didn't matter. Tonight, his son was sleeping peacefully down the hall, and the woman who looked like his late wife but was entirely her own person was making plans to build a new life around their small family. It was enough. 2 weeks had passed since the revelation that Isabella was Sarah's twin sister, and the small town of Millbrook had begun to buzz with rumors about the wealthy tech executive who was supposedly planning to bring her company to Tennessee. Michael found himself fielding questions from neighbors, co-workers, and even the cashier at the grocery store, all wanting to know if it was true that hundreds of high-paying jobs might be coming to their struggling community. The answer, Michael was learning, was more complicated than anyone realized. Isabella had spent the past week on conference calls with her board of directors, her CFO, and a small army of lawyers and accountants. Michael would hear her voice through the guest room door, speaking in the crisp, authoritative tone of someone accustomed to making million-dollar decisions. It was a reminder of the vast differences in their backgrounds. Even as she helped Tommy with his homework each evening and learned to make his favorite grilled cheese sandwiches, this particular Friday morning found Michael sitting in Dr. Martinez's office at Millbrook General, listening to news that made his world tilt on its axis once again. "I'm afraid Tommy's condition has progressed more rapidly than we anticipated," Dr. Martinez said, his weathered face grave as he studied the test results spread across his desk. "The medication is helping, but it's not enough anymore. We need to start thinking seriously about surgical intervention." Michael felt his mouth go dry. "What kind of surgery?" "A complete heart valve replacement. It's a complex procedure, but Tommy is young and strong. With the right surgical team, his prognosis would be excellent. And without the surgery," Dr. Martinez was quiet for a moment, "without it, I'd be surprised if he makes it to his 6th birthday." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. He gripped the arms of his chair, struggling to breathe. "How much time do we have?" "I'd recommend scheduling the surgery within the next 6 to 8 weeks. Any longer than that, and we're taking unnecessary risks." "And the cost?" Dr. Martinez pulled out another sheet of paper, and Michael saw him hesitate before sliding it across the desk. The number at the bottom made Michael's vision blur. $485 dollars. "That's with insurance covering 60%, Dr. Martinez said gently. "I know it seems impossible, but there are programs, payment plans." Michael stared at the estimate, doing rapid mental math. Even if he sold his house, his truck, everything he owned, he wouldn't come close to covering the remaining costs, and Tommy couldn't wait for him to figure out financing. "Dr. Martinez," Michael said slowly, "if I could guarantee payment, how quickly could we schedule this? Within 2 weeks, if necessary. I have contacts at Vanderbilt Children's Hospital. They have one of the best pediatric cardiac surgery programs in the country." Michael nodded numbly and took the paperwork, promising to call within a few days with their decision as he walked through the hospital corridors toward the parking lot. His phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. "How did the appointment go?" He stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "We need to talk." Isabella was waiting for him when he pulled into the driveway, sitting on the front porch steps with Tommy beside her. They were working on a jigsaw puzzle, a 1,000-piece image of dinosaurs that Tommy had been determined to complete since the day Isabella arrived. "That piece goes there, Aunt Isabella," Tommy said, pointing to a section of blue sky. "See, it has the same funny shape." "You're absolutely right," Isabella said, snapping the piece into place. "How did you get so good at puzzles?" "Daddy taught me. He says puzzles are like fixing things, you just have to find where all the pieces belong." Michael stood at the edge of the porch, watching them work together, and felt his heart break a little more. How was he going to tell his 4-year-old son that he needed major surgery? How was he going to explain that Daddy might not be able to afford to save his life? Isabella looked up as he approached, and he saw her expression change as she read something in his face. "Tommy," she said gently, Why don't you go inside and wash your hands for lunch? I'll finish this section while you're gone. Okay. Tommy bounded into the house, leaving Michael and Isabella alone on the porch. It's bad news, Isabella said. It wasn't a question. Michael sat down heavily beside her on the steps. He needs surgery, soon. Without it, he couldn't finish the sentence. Isabella's face went white. When? Within 6 to 8 weeks. Michael pulled out the cost estimate and handed it to her. This is what it's going to cost. Isabella stared at the paper, and Michael watched her expression cycle through shock, determination, and something that looked like fierce protectiveness. Okay, she said simply. Isabella, you can't just say okay to a $500,000 medical bill. Actually, I can. Isabella folded the paper carefully and handed it back to him. I can and I will. This is Tommy's life we're talking about. I can't let you do that. You can't stop me from doing that. Isabella's voice was calm but steel hard. Michael, I have $40 million sitting in various investment accounts. This surgery represents about 1% of my net worth. For me, this is like you buying a tank of gas. Michael stared at her, overwhelmed by gratitude and frustration in equal measure. It's not about the money, Isabella. Well, it is about the money, but it's also about, I'm his father. I'm supposed to be able to take care of him. And you have been taking care of him, Isabella said firmly. You've given him a loving home. You've made sure he got the medical attention he needed. You've been both mother and father to him for 18 months, but you don't have to do it alone anymore. Before Michael could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize with a 615 area code, Nashville. Michael Thompson. The voice was crisp, professional. Yes, this is Janet Morrison from Morrison, Blake & Associates. I'm the attorney who's been handling Miss Rosewood's family search. I understand you're the widower of Sarah Thompson, formerly Sarah Caldwell. That's right. Mr. Thompson, I'm calling because we've discovered some additional information that I believe you and Miss Rosewood need to hear. Would it be possible for both of you to come to our Nashville office this afternoon? Michael looked at Isabella, who had moved closer and was obviously listening to both sides of the conversation. She nodded. We can be there by 3 o'clock, Michael said. Excellent. I'll see you then. After he hung up, Isabella was already standing and brushing off her jeans. I'll call Mrs. Patterson to watch Tommy. What do you think they found? I don't know, Isabella said. But something in her expression suggested she might have some idea. But I think we're about to get some more answers. Morrison, Blake & Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek office building in downtown Nashville. The reception area was all glass and chrome, with original artwork on the walls and the kind of expensive furniture that whispered rather than shouted about the firm's success. Janet Morrison turned out to be a woman in her 50s with silver hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She greeted them in a conference room that offered sweeping views of the Nashville skyline. Thank you both for coming on such short notice, she said, gesturing for them to sit at the polished oak table. What I have to share with you is unusual, to say the least. She opened a thick file folder and pulled out several documents. Ms. Rosewood, when you hired our firm to locate your birth family, you provided us with very limited information. Your adoptive parents had told you that your birth parents died in a car accident and that you had been separated from a sister during the adoption process. Isabella nodded. That's what I'd been told my entire life. Well, it turns out that some of that information was inaccurate. Janet Morrison's voice was careful. Your birth parents, Robert and Linda Caldwell, did indeed die in a car accident when you were 5 years old, and you were indeed separated from your twin sister during the adoption process. But there's more to the story. She pulled out a copy of a legal document. After your parents' death, you and Sarah were placed in temporary foster care while the state tried to locate any living relatives. It turns out there was a relative, your father's brother, James Caldwell, who lived in Oregon. Michael felt a chill run down his spine. Sarah never mentioned having an uncle, because she didn't know about him. Janet Morrison said. James Caldwell was contacted by Tennessee Social Services, and he initially agreed to take both girls. But then something happened that changed everything. She pulled out another document, what looked like a medical report. Isabella, you were born 4 minutes before your sister, but you were also born with a serious heart defect. The doctors weren't sure you would survive infancy. Your Uncle James was told that you would require expensive, ongoing medical care, potentially for the rest of your life. Isabella's hand went to her chest unconsciously. I've never had heart problems. Because the Rosewood family in California had the resources to get you the best medical care available. You had surgery when you were 6 years old to correct the defect, but at the time of the adoption, your Uncle James was a working-class man with limited resources. He was told he could adopt one healthy child or 2 children, one of whom would require expensive medical care for an indefinite period. Michael felt sick to his stomach. He chose Sarah. Janet Morrison confirmed. Isabella was placed for adoption with a family who specifically wanted to adopt a child with medical needs, the Rosewoods, who had been trying to conceive for years and had the financial resources to handle any medical situation. The room was completely silent for several moments. Michael looked at Isabella and saw tears streaming down her face. So Sarah went to live with family, and I was given away because I was sick, Isabella whispered. That's not exactly how it played out, Janet Morrison said gently. Your Uncle James died in a logging accident 6 months after he adopted Sarah. She went back into the foster care system at that point. Isabella's head snapped up. What? Sarah spent the rest of her childhood bouncing between foster homes, just like you always believed you would have if you hadn't been adopted by the Rosewoods. Janet Morrison's voice was compassionate. In a strange way, the decision that separated you girls ended up giving you both the families you needed. Sarah got to spend 6 months with a loving uncle before the tragedy, and you got the medical care that saved your life. Michael was staring at the documents spread across the table, trying to process everything he'd heard. So if Isabella had been healthy, they would have been adopted together. Most likely, yes. And if James Caldwell hadn't died, Sarah would have grown up with family instead of in foster care. Janet Morrison gathered the papers into a neat stack. There's one more thing. We found something else among Sarah's effects. She handed Isabella a small jewelry box. This was in the storage unit with her other personal items from when she aged out of foster care. Isabella opened the box with trembling hands. Inside was a simple silver locket on a thin chain. She opened the locket to reveal 2 tiny photos, one of Isabella as a baby, one of Sarah. She kept a picture of me, Isabella whispered. According to the social worker's notes, she was given that locket when she was first placed with your uncle. She kept it her entire life. Isabella stared at the locket, tears falling onto the conference table. She never forgot me. It appears she never stopped looking for you, either. We found evidence that she made several attempts over the years to locate adoption records, but the files were sealed. Michael reached over and took Isabella's free hand. She would have loved you, he said quietly. If she'd found you, she would have loved you so much. Isabella closed the locket and put it around her neck with shaking hands. All these years, I thought I was the lucky one. I thought I was the one who got the better life because I was adopted by a wealthy family. You were both lucky, Janet Morrison said gently. You both found families who loved you. You both became strong, successful women, and now you've found each other's families. As they left the law office and walked back to Michael's truck, Isabella was quiet, processing everything they'd learned. It wasn't until they were halfway back to Millbrook that she spoke. Michael, yeah, I want to do more than just pay for Tommy's surgery. Isabella's voice was quiet but determined. I want to establish a foundation, a medical foundation to help families who can't afford critical care for their children. Michael glanced at her. Like what happened to us would have happened without your money. Exactly like that. I want to call it the Sarah Caldwell Foundation. Isabella stared out the passenger window at the Tennessee countryside rolling past. I want to make sure no parent ever has to choose between saving their child's life and going bankrupt. That's a beautiful way to honor her memory. I have the money to do it. Michael, I could fund it with $50 million and still have more wealth than I know what to do with. Isabella turned to look at him. But I want you to help me run it. I want us to be partners in this. Michael was quiet for several minutes, considering what she was proposing. A foundation that could help hundreds of families like theirs. A way to turn their personal tragedy into something that could save other children's lives. On one condition, he said finally. What condition? We run it from here, from Millbrook. We build your tech campus. We create jobs for this community. And we base the foundation here too. Isabella smiled for the first time since they'd left the law office. I was hoping you'd say that. 3 weeks later, Michael stood in the waiting room at Vanderbilt Children's Hospital, watching Isabella pace back and forth across the polished floor. Tommy had been in surgery for 4 hours, and the waiting was excruciating. The cardiac surgery team at Vanderbilt was everything Dr. Martinez had promised world-class surgeons with experience in the most complex pediatric cases. They'd reviewed Tommy's case and assured Michael and Isabella that the procedure, while serious, was well within their capabilities. Still, Michael couldn't shake the fear that had been gnawing at him since they'd admitted Tommy that morning. His little boy had been so brave, chattering excitedly about the heart doctors who were going to fix him and asking if he'd have a scar like Harry Potter. He's going to be fine, Isabella said, settling into the chair beside Michael for the dozenth time that afternoon. Dr. Peterson said the surgery was going exactly as planned. I know, Michael said, though his voice betrayed his anxiety. It's just, he's all I have left of her. He's not all you have left, Isabella said gently. And you're not going to lose him. Michael looked at her. This woman who had appeared in their lives like an answer to a prayer he hadn't known he was praying over the past month. Isabella had become essential to their daily routine in ways both large and small. She helped Tommy with his homework, sang him to sleep when he had nightmares, and had somehow convinced Michael's ancient washing machine to work better than it had in years. More than that, she had become Michael's partner in ways he was still learning to navigate. They'd spent hours planning the foundation, researching the best ways to help families facing medical crises. Isabella had already hired a team of lawyers and accountants to begin the legal process of establishing the Sarah Caldwell Foundation, and she'd put aside $60 million, $20 million more than originally planned to fund it. There's something I need to tell you, Michael said, not taking his eyes off the surgical waiting room doors. What? I love you. The words came out quietly, but with absolute certainty. Not because you look like Sarah, not because you're helping with Tommy's medical bills, not because you're Sarah's sister. I love you because you're you, because you make terrible coffee but excellent pancakes, because you sing off-key in the shower and you let Tommy paint your fingernails purple, because you're brilliant and kind and you make me want to be a better man. Isabella was quiet for so long that Michael finally turned to look at her. She was staring at him with tears in her eyes. I love you too, she said finally. I've been afraid to say it because everything happened so fast, and because I wasn't sure if my feelings were real or if I was just trying to get closer to Sarah's memory. But spending these weeks with you and Tommy, this is the most real I've ever felt in my life. Michael reached for her hand, and they sat in comfortable silence as the hospital bustled around them. Nurses hurried past with charts and medications. Families huddled in quiet conversations. And somewhere down the hall, a baby was crying. Mr. Thompson. Dr. Peterson's voice made them both look up. The surgeon was still in his scrubs, but he was smiling. The surgery went perfectly. Tommy did beautifully. His new valve is functioning exactly as we hoped. Michael felt his knees go weak with relief. When can we see him? He'll be in recovery for about an hour. Then we'll move him to the cardiac ICU. You can see him then, but he'll be pretty groggy for the rest of today. After Dr. Peterson left, Michael and Isabella held each other in the middle of the waiting room, both of them crying with relief and gratitude. He's going to be okay, Isabella whispered against Michael's shoulder. He's going to be okay, Michael repeated, as if saying it out loud would make it even more true. 6 months later, Michael stood on the front porch of their new house, a sprawling farmhouse on 50 acres just outside Millbrook, where the Sarah Caldwell Foundation headquarters was under construction. In the distance, he could see the preliminary construction for the Rosewood Technologies campus, which would bring over 300 jobs to the area within the next 2 years. Tommy came running around the corner of the house, chasing a golden retriever puppy that Isabella had insisted they needed. The scar on Tommy's chest had healed beautifully, and his energy levels were higher than they'd ever been. Dr. Martinez had declared him completely healthy at his last checkup. "Daddy," Tommy called out, the puppy tumbling along beside him. "Aunt Isabella says dinner's ready." "Aunt Isabella," Michael called through the screen door. "Since when do you call him when dinner's ready instead of using the dinner bell?" Isabella appeared in the doorway wearing an apron covered in flour and what looked like chocolate. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she had a smudge of something on her cheek that made Michael want to kiss it away. "Since I burned the first batch of cornbread and wanted to distract him before he noticed," she said with a grin. "I smell smoke," Tommy announced helpfully. "Traitor," Isabella said, ruffling his hair as he ran past her into the house. Michael walked over to Isabella and used his thumb to wipe the flour smudge from her cheek. "You know, for a woman who can run a multi-million-dollar tech company, you're remarkably disaster-prone in the kitchen." "I'm learning," Isabella protested. "And anyway, you knew what you were getting into when you proposed." Michael looked down at the simple engagement ring on Isabella's finger. Nothing like the expensive jewelry she could afford, but exactly what she'd wanted when he'd proposed 3 months earlier on the anniversary of the night he'd pulled her from that wrecked BMW. The proposal itself had been far from romantic by traditional standards. They'd been standing in the half-built foundation offices, reviewing architectural plans and arguing about the placement of the children's playroom, when Michael had suddenly realized he couldn't imagine a future that didn't include Isabella in every aspect of it. "Isabella," he'd said, interrupting her explanation of why the playroom needed to be visible from the reception area. "What, marry me?" She'd stared at him for a long moment, then looked around at the construction debris and the dust-covered plans. Here now, wherever, whenever. I just know I want to spend the rest of my life building things with you." Things like foundations and tech campuses, things like families and dreams and futures we never could have imagined on our own. Isabella had said yes, and they'd kissed surrounded by sawdust and scaffolding, with Tommy cheering in the background because he'd been hiding behind a stack of drywall, eavesdropping on the conversation. Now, 6 months later, they were planning a small wedding for the following spring. Mrs. Patterson was insisting on handling the flowers. The entire town seemed to be involved in planning the reception, and Tommy had appointed himself ring bearer, best man, and wedding planner. "Mr. Michael." A voice from the driveway interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see a young woman approaching the house, holding the hand of a little girl who couldn't have been more than 3 years old. "Can I help you?" Michael asked. "I hope so," the woman said, her voice shaky with emotion. "My name is Jennifer Martinez. This is my daughter, Sophia. Dr. Martinez at the hospital gave me your address. He said you might be able to help us." Michael looked at the little girl, who was pale and thin in the way that spoke of serious illness, behind him. He heard Isabella step onto the porch. "What's wrong with Sophia?" Isabella asked gently. "She needs a liver transplant," Jennifer said, tears starting to fall. "The doctors found a donor, but our insurance won't cover the full cost, and we can't afford." She broke down completely. Isabella was already moving, kneeling down to Sophia's eye level. "Hi, sweetheart. What's your favorite color, Mom?" "Pink," Sophia whispered shyly. "Pink is a great color. Do you know what? I have a friend who helps little kids who need operations. Would you like to meet him?" Sophia nodded, and Isabella looked up at Jennifer. "How much do you need?" "The total cost is $180,000. Insurance will cover about half." "Consider it covered," Isabella said simply. "I'll call our foundation coordinator tonight and have the hospital contacted first thing Monday morning." Jennifer stared at Isabella in shock. Just like that. Just like that. Isabella stood up and put her arm around Michael's waist. That's what we're here for. As they watched Jennifer and Sophia drive away an hour later, after Tommy had showed Sophia his dinosaur collection, and Isabella had sent them home with a care package that included her phone number and instructions to call if they needed anything, Michael felt the same sense of rightness he'd experienced the night he'd found Isabella. That's the 15th family this month, Isabella said, leaning against his side. Best investment you ever made, Michael asked. Best investment I ever made, Isabella confirmed. Though I have to say, the returns are getting better all the time. From inside the house came the sound of Tommy practicing his piano lesson, another one of Isabella's additions to their lives, and the puppy barking at something in the backyard. The foundation headquarters was starting to look like an actual building rather than a construction site, and Rosewood Technologies had hired its first 50 Tennessee employees. Life was complicated and messy, and nothing like what Michael had imagined when he'd been driving home that stormy night 6 months earlier. But it was also full and rich, and exactly what Sarah would have wanted for all of them. You know what I think, Michael said, wrapping his arms around Isabella as the sun set over the Tennessee hills. What do you think? I think Sarah sent you to us. I think she somehow knew that her sister was the missing piece we didn't even know we needed. Isabella was quiet for a moment, her hand absently reaching up to touch the silver locket she wore every day, the one that contained photos of two little girls who'd finally found their way back to each other's families. Maybe she did, Isabella said softly. And maybe that's exactly how love is supposed to work. As they stood on their front porch, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky, Michael couldn't help but think that some puzzles took years to complete. But when all the pieces finally fell into place, the picture they created was more beautiful than anything you could have imagined at the start. Tommy's laughter echoed from inside the house. The puppy barked happily in the backyard, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle called across the hills of Tennessee, carrying dreams and possibilities into the night. It was exactly what home was supposed to sound like.